Hello, my name is Judd Krotzer. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and I've had the privilege to work with partners to implement strategic wood addition projects throughout northeastern Vermont since about 2012. And in this presentation, I want to introduce you to strategic wood addition, what it means, and why it's a useful tool to have in the toolbox of stream and habitat restoration. Most of what I'm going to talk about in this presentation is covered in the Vermont Strategic Wood Addition Handbook. There's also a whole lot more information in that. The handbook is available on the Vermont Fish and Wildlife website, or you could contact me, and my contact information will be on the last slide. And these are the questions I want to answer in this presentation, explain what I mean by the term strategic wood addition, and then why we would add wood to streams, and then why would we use strategic wood addition as a practice for adding wood to streams. All right, the first question is, what is strategic wood addition? And I've got it broken into the three words there. It's strategic because there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into this before you even start up a chainsaw to start dropping trees. And there's another presentation that's on this web page that will explain a lot of that thought that needs to go into the pre-project planning. But even when you're out there on the stream and you're actually going through the process of adding wood to the streams, there's still more thought as to where exactly you're going to work, which trees you're going to cut, how you're going to get them down, how they're going to be stable in the stream. It's not just a random process. There's a lot of thought and planning and strategy with this. It involves wood, obviously, because wood is an important factor for aquatic organism habitat and for stream function. And it's something that many streams would benefit from because there's often a lack of wood in many of our streams in Vermont. And then finally, it's addition because we're adding wood to places where it is needed. I think of strategic wood addition in two different categories. And many people have heard the phrase chop and drop. People like to use that phrase because it has a nice ring to it. I try to not overuse that because some people get the wrong idea when they hear that. It sounds like you're randomly chopping and dropping trees. Whereas, as I said on the last slide, there's a lot of thought and planning that goes into this. But I do use the phrase chop and drop when I talk about the work that we do on small streams, because on those streams, you can cut a tree down and leave it. You don't have to reposition it. It will be stable. A small stream for strategic wood addition purposes is a stream where the average trees on the stream bank are at least twice as tall as the bank full width of the stream. When you have that, and assuming this is a stream that has trees growing along the bank, when you have trees that are large relative to the stream channel, those trees really can't move very far. If the water comes up, those trees can't move very far before they end up getting trapped or pinned against standing trees on the bank. So that's why you can drop those trees and you don't have to reposition them. But there still is a lot of thought and strategy that goes into which trees you use and how you drop them in. The other category is on large streams, and that I use the phrase chop and grip, because on these streams where the trees are less than twice the bank full width in their height, you need to do a little more repositioning after the trees get down. Some trees you can drop and you don't have to do much work afterwards to get them secure, but often once a tree is down, you'll have to use the grip hoist or some other means to get those trees positioned in such a way that they will be stable even when the water comes up. So now I've explained what strategic wood addition is. The next question is, why would we add wood to streams? And the reason is a lot of streams in Vermont look kind of like this. And to some people, maybe that looks fine. I guess it is kind of pretty. But if you're someone that cares about fish and stream processes, this is a pretty boring channel. There's not much cover here for fish. And this is a good channel for floating logs, which is what this was used for. This was a channel where there were many log drives on this channel in the past. This is a good place to move wood and organic material and sediment downstream. And that's exactly what we have done with a lot of our streams in the past. In Vermont, they were used to transport logs, and so to do that, they pulled the wood out of the stream. They even dynamited boulders in some cases, which this is really devastating for fish habitat. And also in all of that, we repeatedly clear cut our forests. And so even today, our forests are relatively young, even the ones growing along the stream channel. So if you had mature forests or old growth forests, you'd have these big, large trees that are dying and they're falling into the stream. And because they're so big, they end up being stable in the channel and they provide these important features for habitat and for stream function. But we just don't have that. So that's why there's a need for adding wood to streams in Vermont today. And at this point, I want to emphasize that even though we're talking about a process where we actually go out and add trees to streams, ideally what we want is to restore the natural process of this happening. And the way we do that is by protecting and restoring our streamside forests. Because if we allow our forests that are growing along our streams to get big and mature and just reinvigorate that natural process of these large trees falling into streams and making these big natural log jams, which are important for stream processes and aquatic organism habitat, then we don't need to go back out there. We don't need to be out there adding trees ourselves. It's just a natural process that's occurring. And that's really what we want to have happen. We're only out there because that's not happening yet. And the other thing we really need to do is to make sure that people know that we want wood in the streams. There are a lot of people out there that they see wood in streams and they think it's either ugly or dangerous or both, and they want it pulled out of there. And that's one of the benefits of doing strategic wood addition projects is we get to communicate to people that we want that wood in the stream. We're actually purposely going out there and putting it in there. We want it there. If it falls in naturally, we want it there too. So let's leave the wood in the streams because it's an important feature in our streams. But as I said, because of past land use practices and log drives and other things that we've done in our rivers, there's an opportunity to make things better right now by adding wood to streams while we wait for our forests to mature and start that natural process again. And we've been able to do that work thanks to our partners. And I want to talk next about some of that background work that was important in getting us to the point where we are today. Around 2008, Trout Unlimited positioned an employee in northeastern Vermont and northern New Hampshire, and he wanted to do good things for fish and fishing, which is great because that's what we want to do at Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And specifically, we were interested in what we could do for brook trout. So the first thing we needed to do was to determine whether there was anything we could do for brook trout in northeastern Vermont. And so we did a study to see what factors were most limiting for brook trout abundance in northeastern Vermont. And that took us 3 years to complete. And what we found was the most important factor was water temperature, which isn't surprising because we know that brook trout need cold water. But we also found that the amount of large wood in the stream was also really important, so that we knew if we had cold water temperatures and we had a lot of wood, we would expect to see a lot of brook trout. If we had cold water and not much wood, we knew that if we added wood, we should see more brook trout. And so using that information, then we're able to go out and assess the available habitat in northeastern Vermont, prioritize where we would improve habitat, and then we began implementing our habitat improvement work in 2012, and we've been evaluating that work ever since. Now I want to share with you some of the results of our evaluations, because this helps to answer that question of why add wood to streams. On the larger streams where we use the grip hoist, using those chop and grip methods, each of the structures that we build on those streams are tagged so that we can evaluate them, we can revisit them in future years. And right now we have 575 of those structures out there that have gone through at least one full year. We don't have many of these structures on the smaller streams because we know that that wood is going to be stable and functional, but we're really paying close attention on these larger streams because we want to see how long that wood is going to last and continue to function. Of the 575 structures that we have out there that have gone through at least 1 year, 508 of them are still providing at least some function in their original location. Most of these structures are catching organic material. A lot of them are providing cover for fish. They're retaining sediment. They're narrowing the low flow channel, forming pools. Some are improving floodplain access and scouring the stream bed. And only 67 of them are not functioning in their original location. Next, I want to give you some examples of the different functions that large wood can perform in streams. The first one is retaining organic material. This is really important because that organic material in the form of leaves and sticks that fall in from the forest is the base of the food web for these streams. That organic material decomposes and becomes food for insects, which are then food for fish. The problem with many of our streams in Vermont is that they are very good at transporting organic material, especially the ones that were used for floating logs in the past. But if you have a stream that has pieces of large wood in it or boulders, things that provide roughness in the channel, those are places where that organic material can be captured before it gets washed downstream. I put the next three functions together because they often come together. The first one there is retaining sediment. I mentioned on the last slide that many of our small higher elevation streams are really good at transporting organic material. They're also good at transporting sediment. One big problem with that is that that sediment ends up somewhere, and it's usually downstream, and it's usually going to cause a problem somewhere downstream. Whereas we want some of that sediment to stay up in these higher elevation streams because that really fine sediment often includes organic material. As those leaves decompose, they become really small bits, and that becomes food for the insects, which are food for the fish. And also, we want some small rocks like gravel to serve as spawning substrate for brook trout and other fish. And so one benefit of wood, large wood in streams, is that it can help us retain sediment in places where we want it rather than having that all wash downstream. And also, when you're retaining sediment, when wood is retaining sediment, it often is retaining it on the sides of the channel, so that when the water gets low in the summer, the surface area of the stream gets smaller. So there's less surface area exposed to the sun and to the heat. So in theory, that helps keep things cooler. And if you're narrowing the channel because you're depositing sediment on the sides, often you're increasing the depth at the same time. So large wood can create these opportunities for the stream to scour itself a little bit deeper, providing some deeper habitat, which is really important for fish. Next is forming pools. If you're an angler that fishes brook trout streams, you know that one of the best places to fish is often where a log has formed a pool. And so we're able to do some of that in some cases by adding wood. Next function is floodplain access. We're doing our strategic wood addition work in those smaller, higher elevation streams where people aren't living. Most people are living further downstream. And in those places, we want large wood, and we want boulders, and we want things in the channel that are going to slow the flow when we get big rain events. We want to slow the flow down up there so it doesn't just all come rushing downstream to where everybody lives and causing problems. And if you have enough wood, enough roughness in the channel, you can sometimes get those high water events. You can get the water to spill into the forest, into the floodplain, where it can drop sediment, it can drop organic material, it has a chance to soak into the ground, it slows it down, so it's less likely to cause problems for people downstream. And I had mentioned the structures that are not performing functions in the places where we originally put them. But that wood is still performing a function somewhere. The wood from those structures has moved, but it's usually ended up either on another structure downstream, on a big in-stream boulder, on an outside bend. It's ended up somewhere, and it's still performing a function for the stream. So even that wood that moved is not wasted. Next, I want to talk about the benefits of large wood to fish, and brook trout in particular, because that's really why we got into this work to begin with. And we carefully studied the response of brook trout to strategic wood additions in the East Branch Nalhegan River watershed. We had a carefully designed study with 9 pairs of control and treatment sites. The control and treatment sites were close together. And we added wood to the treatment sites, but not the control sites. And we electrofished. That's where we use electricity to stun the fish, and then we can measure them and weigh them, observe them, and then put them back. We electrofished 2 years before we added wood. And then we electrofished for 4 years after we added wood to the treatment sites. And this is what we found. Very clearly, we saw an increase in the brook trout biomass at the treatment sites. And biomass includes the abundance and the size of the fish. And one question that people often ask is, how do you know you aren't just concentrating fish in the areas of good habitat? The question is, if you add wood, do the fish just all concentrate in those areas, or do you have an overall increase in the population? And if you look at the year 2014 there, which was the first year after we added wood, it does seem like some of that happened, where we seem to move fish from the control areas to the treatment areas. And that's not surprising because it takes a little bit of time for a population to respond. But as time went on, we see the control sites even rebounded to the point where at the end of the study, there were even more brook trout at the control sites than there were before we added wood. And so clearly we had an overall increase in brook trout abundance in these streams. And it's not too surprising to see the benefits to the control sites as well, because the benefits of adding wood include capturing that organic material and providing cover for maybe juvenile fish. And so that wood is added to these treatment sites, but there's also these spillover benefits into other parts of the stream. Hopefully I've made the case that adding wood to streams can be a good thing if it's done using the right techniques and methods and done in the right locations. And I encourage you to watch the next presentation about pre-project planning to help learn where those right locations are. But the last question is, why use strategic wood addition to do this work? Certainly a lot of what we do in adding wood could be done, in a lot of cases, maybe more efficiently with a big machine. Of course, the challenges with that is that that machine has to get into the stream, which can be disruptive to the stream banks and the stream bed, whereas the methods that we're using with chainsaw, grip hoist, and muscle power are much lower impact. And furthermore, we have proven that our methods have been effective both in allowing the wood to stay where we put it, in that wood functioning, and the benefits to fish. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Judd Krautzer, at the number or email address that you see here.